Okay. And we're live.
Live! And Drew is probably hiding himself, community, but one thing to know that Shirley helped to identify is he's actually in a Barnes & Noble, which turns out they still exist. Not only that, he's in the romance section. So he's helping to produce this event from, where he spends his afternoons on Fridays. So good to know. Awesome. So is it up and running, Drew? Are we good? Okay.
Yes,
yeah, we're
live. Go for it.
Hey, everybody. It's awesome to hang out again. Happy Friday. We're super excited to be here with a amazing broadband leader, Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley, welcome. It's really great to get time with you.
It's great to be here with you, Chase. Thank you.
Yeah. I know you're super busy advocating for rural broadband and helping your members, make the most of their opportunities to connect rural Americans. Being from rural America, being from a small town, a little, what I call a 3F town, which is farms and factories and football. It means a lot, to me personally, that you're working on that. And I know that you've been doing a lot to help, your members, and that they're rolling up their sleeves to get folks connected to broadband. So, folks that are members in TCI, we really appreciate what you do for rural America. And Shirley, I know you're busy, so I really appreciate you making time to connect. Because, like, for example, everybody, just so you know, we have a check-in call ahead of time to make sure everything works. Make sure Drew, will be in the romance section of Barnes & Noble when we do our call. And on this one, Shirley, we spoke a few days ago. You're actually just stepping out of a really interesting place. It was, you said it, and I was like, and you said the White House, right? So you were at the White House.
It was the White House, and it wasn't even my house that is painted white. It was the White House.
There's White House, but then there's the White House, and you were there, and I found that to be pretty awesome.
Well, you know what? It is pretty awesome. I gotta be honest with you. No matter the times you get a chance to have an honor like that, it never gets dull. And the opportunity to be around a table and be part of these critical conversations. This one happened to be about workforce for the broadband industry. How we're going to get this Infrastructure Act all done and built, because we need to find workers to actually do some of this stuff. So to be able to be around that table with Mitch Landry, who's leading the infrastructure initiative, was a great opportunity. A great Friday, I would say. That's
cool. Yeah, Landry's a total ace. Infrastructure czar, mayor. It is cool dude as a mayor too, but that's really amazing, Shirley. So you're definitely having those conversations, and because you touched on that first, rural America has a lot of really talented people. You're talking about workforce. We heard from Gary Bolton of Fiber Broadband Association, who you've teamed up with to do a playbook, that workforce is a big thing on their mind. Training for fiber is a thing that they've been helping with, the initiative. Do you think that there's opportunity for rural Americans to get involved in the broadband space as we go to wire up, our nation's largest ever investment in broadband?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'll share a few observations. One of the things that we find is in the communities my member companies serve, and there's about 850 of them across the country, serving about 35% of the landmass or so. They do have a lot of homegrown talent, but what we find a lot of times is you get you get these techs in, you get these folks who are trained in kind of this technical arena, and suddenly they're able to be lured away by larger companies in more urban areas. And that's really tough. When you're a small company, you're a community-based provider, or you're a co-op, and you're having to compete against a national provider, that becomes a different ballgame. But the other thing that I thought was really, really interesting in some of our work in this arena is that we're starting to realize that young kids, K through 12, don't really think of broadband as a career. So I was just on the phone yesterday with the guy, Alan Pratt, who's head of the National Rural Education Association. We're going to see what we can do to come together to put a K through 12 program together to kind of create that awareness, this is a cool careers track. Broadband is an ever-evolving, ever-growing field. The different jobs that you can actually have in this space are fascinating. And getting kids to think about the fact that this may be a path to look at. So even before you get to how do we train people through community colleges? How do we actually find people to employ? How do you start getting the 12-year-olds to be like, I don't that could be pretty cool.
Yeah.
What does it mean to do, cyber for a small company, or what does it mean to actually be the, splicing fiber and starting from that direction? So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in this arena.
Okay. And do you have any jobs for broadband folks that you can talk about or share? Because we just launched on the community. I don't know if you saw it or not, but there's a really cool post. Let's pull this up yesterday from Nicole, the editor of Broadband World News, where she did a roundup of like broadband jobs. And it was so mind blowing that we sat around and we're like, oh, she just wants like a broadband jobs board. So there's now a free broadband jobs board. If you got any jobs for broadband, like go post them there, because that's super important.
So, we do a jobs board for our member companies, and
Nice.
and so they're able to kind of post. The other thing that we do is we probably have the most comprehensive compensation and benefits survey of all of the broadband jobs of any
Nice.
for our sector of anybody in the country. So we literally are able to crunch data from hundreds of companies to say, what are splicers getting, in the Northeast versus the Southwest? What are general managers?
Wow.
What are CFOs? What are some of the wireless experts? So yeah, we actually have really comprehensive, which is another tool. It's kind of the advantage of a trade association. We're able to aggregate for our member companies so that they don't have to try to figure out this data on their own. And we also do an executive search. So we place CEOs of broadband providers across the country, which is pretty cool and pretty interesting. But even in that arena, I'm going to tell you, competition is tighter than it's been.
Right.
When people deliberate too long, when boards deliberate too long, candidates have got 4 other offers. They're off and running. So just a different labor market for everybody, I think, regardless of where you live.
That's awesome, Shirley. And your members are helping to get, the opportunities that you can do them from other places. And, that's something that we want to talk a lot about on today's call, if we can, is, your thoughts about smart rural communities, right? Like, I know you're doing a lot there, and we'd love to dig into that and hear about what you're doing for that, like what it means. And also I'm very curious, as somebody that's from rural America, small town, Maryville, Missouri, Merville, if you're from there, go Spoofhounds. But if you're not a smart community, right? Like that's something that I think that you're very attuned to, and that you can help, a lot of the state broadband directors that are listening today, a lot of the folks that are working with state broadband directors that are listening today, like, you said to me something that really struck me, Shirley, on our prep call, is like, don't forget about rural America. This idea of smart rural communities, if you could talk about that a little bit and sort of set the stage before we dive into the stack of questions that we have for you. But I'd also be very curious to hear your thoughts on, like, be blunt, right? What's the situation in, like, say 5 years if a rural community like isn't smart?
Yeah. So I guess I would start with, how do you define a smart rural community? And I'll just share, Jace, that, a few years ago when everybody was like, ooh, smart cities, that's so cool. We were like, the same thing that makes a city smart are the same things that actually exist in a lot of rural communities. So we really honed in on what our member companies do that make their communities smart. And it's really about the community being smart. Yeah, you know what? You're powered by amazing, robust broadband in these communities, but it's then that partnership between the broadband provider and the community itself, whether it's the healthcare provider, the agriculture community, whether it's the public safety folks, to take that broadband and to really power that engine of economic growth and do amazing things, like whether it's telemedicine initiatives or whether it's, educational initiatives. It's that kind of power behind the engine that makes that community a place where you can live, work, and play, raise your kids, and do anything that you could do using technology in an urban area, except have a lot of traffic and a lot of lines when you're trying to go someplace. But it's getting.
You've never been to a Bearcats, a Northwest Missouri State University Bearcats game in the hour or two before it, because there are legit rural traffic jams in situations like that.
I can imagine, and you probably don't have the 4-lane highway, so that makes it a little bit trickier.
Right.
But I do think we do have about 250 communities that have the designation of being smart rural communities. They work with their broadband providers. our folks again are the ones that power and get that designation. But what is really fun, you'll see I've got a sign behind me, but we literally have highway signs. So people can kind of be like, you are entering a smart rural community. And, people will drive in and be like, what does this mean? Or, when you get the rotary signs and all the other cool signs that are up, putting that notification there, putting it in the mayor's office. But it's getting the community, because so many times when we think about adoption, and we think about adoption of broadband in some smaller communities where folks may not be as uber connected as sometimes, unfortunately, folks can be, it's thinking about what are those applications? Why do I want to do these things? Why do I want to be able to download X-rays? Why do I want to be able to do diagnostic work with Vanderbilt that's 300 miles away? Or why is precision agriculture actually great for small farms? Because it allows them to kind of achieve scope and scale that up until now, without using technology, only really big corporate farms can do. So it's getting everybody excited about the technology. So, my guys, it's fiber fed. You have to have a base of a lot of fiber infrastructure to get this qualification. But like I said, it's a way for rural America to brand themselves, because I think people on the coast sometimes, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but they like to think there's a big nothing in the middle, and they think about being
flyover.
Exactly. But you think about where your cell service actually dies. That's a different issue. You hit these rural communities. My guys have over 75% of their customers have fiber to the prem. That is, I'm not sure you could say that about Northern Virginia here in the Washington, D.C. area. That's phenomenal.
I can't get it here in the Bay Area in California.
I'm just saying, so that's what makes these communities smart. So when we think about a rural renaissance and we think about people looking forward to that Bearcat traffic jam on a Friday night, and want to move to a smaller community, the infrastructure is there. And I think with the help of BEAD and some of these other programs, we're going to build it. We're going to get it done.
I love that. That's so cool. So there's like 1,600 things to unpack in what you just said, but one that is on my mind right now, being in California, which is, slightly terrifying these days, is you just touched on like one little topic, right? It's like, you just said it, but it requires rural broadband. But state folks that are listening from the Southwest, we're thinking, maybe you're thinking broadband is a fourth utility. That's great, but there's a utility before that. It's water, and we're running out of it in places. And precision agriculture, Shirley, like, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I love on your website, there's this like kick-ass, it's cool. Your website's pretty cool, but it's Drew is too busy at Barnes and Noble romance section to let me share my screen, but I would share your website, ntca.org. In the top of it is like this really cool shot of a farmer, and she's like crop dusting with a drone, right? It's pretty badass.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, there's also like precision water, right, that comes about. And the idea of being like really, really smart and thoughtful about water, it requires extensive fiber infrastructure, extensive wireless infrastructure, right? So what you're talking about when you're talking about smart rural communities, you're not just talking about like the in-town applications. You're talking about the ability to be really smart as a nation about resources, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And, Precision Ag, we just did our Smart Rural SRC Live event in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and we had all of these different application partners joining us. And we had a bunch of folks in the Smart Ag arena, the folks from Bovine, I can't even remember the name of the company, but it's things like the water management, it's things like the irrigation control, it's things like identifying, facial recognition for cows, which is a really important thing, right? I'm just
that's awesome.
It is awesome. And, even the thermal work that you can do using broadband to do diagnostic care for, whether it's your cattle, whether it's your horses, but the ability to identify wellness among your livestock before you've got issues. There are so many applications. And again, the thing that I think is super cool about this is it allows those small family farms to actually be able to use technology in a very cost-effective way that you would normally need to be like have a lot of scope and scale to achieve. So the innovation in this area is astounding. Just, you know what, just take a smart kid who sits in the basement and codes. They'll come up with tons of applications in the
My
smart
cousin.
community. You just need the infrastructure, right?
If you're watching this, listen to her. Come on. You got a computer science degree.
Yeah. That's right. STEM. We're all about it.
This is cool, Shirley. So there's another aspect to Smart Rural that you're helping, your members to deliver, and it's something that I think about a lot. It's an idea from Catherine Boyle, who's now at Andreessen Horowitz, and she wrote an essay a year ago in the middle of like the second wave of the pandemic, called American Dynamism. And it was like this call to arms for builders to help solve like important civic and governmental and institutional problems wherever they are. And your work reminds me of the thing that I think about a lot when I think about that perspective. Is like she says, like we can reboot a lot of things, we can get our ass back in gear on a lot of things, right? But the decline of American prosperity, if there is any right now, it is not attributable to technology. And I agree with just about everything she says, but it's like going to places that don't have infrastructure, rural America, seeing that they have factories, right, that are mothballed that could be rebooted to bring creation back on shore, seeing that they have like deep roots in being very self-sufficient, but they don't have the 21st century information infrastructure, right? They don't actually, they can't say that, right? You can't say that in rural America, and that's like many tens of percents of land mass in the United States. So that's something that I appreciate that y'all are doing and your members are doing, is this smart rural communities. And I think that's really awesome. So
thanks. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that for as much as we're so excited about what my member companies have done, there's still a lot of rural that is left to be served.
Most definitely.
And there's a lot of folks in large cities that are still waiting to be connected. So I think we've got a big job ahead of us. So I think, but to your earlier point, Jace, the idea of what you can fuel, I mean, the number two thing that site location folks will ask, is what does the internet look like? So as we talk about onshoring, as we talk about like the semiconductor shortfall, and we talk about bringing American manufacturing back onto our shores, it's going to take that connectivity, and I think you're going to see more incentives. You're also going to see people who are looking to move to these rural communities also being very focused on, I will move somewhere if I can remote work, and that means I'm going to need robust internet. And it's one of the reasons we're partnering with this group called fiberhomes.com, because what they're doing is creating literally a real estate database out in kind of the hinterland that identifies the real estate that has fiber connectivity, and working then with the state realtors to be able to profile and say, you know what, so when you're selling these houses, now you really know the value of what you're selling. And I think connecting all those dots is really important.
That's fantastic. Shirley, you mentioned fiber again, supply chain. I know this was a very favorite topic of yours, and it's Friday, and it's some kind of, it can be a downer topic, but we'll get some beers later on and talk more about it. But it's like, what the hell? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Is it any better than it was a few months ago? Is it getting worse? What do you see there?
So I see a little bit of a stalemate. So you're kind of referencing the point that if you were to ask my members how long it takes them if they put a fiber optics order in today, they would tell you it takes over 70 weeks to get that order fulfilled. The other thing that's a little bit scary about it is they are also now not getting a price. So they are now having to accept an order. Yeah, this is the new kicker. So that you're going to need 100 miles of fiber. You're putting your order in, and they're basically saying, we'll let you know what the price of that is when it gets delivered. The ability to lock in. So right. So you think about all of this money coming down the pike, and you think, well, to manage grants effectively, you're going to have to know what you need to know. So that's going to be a challenge. The one thing I'm finding is my companies in particular, because they've been under this stress for about a year, they're planning better. They're planning further in advance. Most of them have about a year's worth of inventory. And we're working with a lot of different manufacturers and distributors to talk about like, all right, you know what? I totally get it. A large nationwide carrier like AT&T or Verizon comes in and has a huge order. My guys will continue to get butt checked to the back of the line. What can we do about ensuring that if we're really committed as a country to living this commitment that rural America will actually get broadband connectivity? Some of those suppliers and manufacturers are also going to have to work with us to make sure that those orders get fulfilled for these smaller markets. It's just, so I think there's some critical discussions going on, and I remain optimistic that folks will be ramping up domestic manufacturing as well, because the other provision that NTIA recently put out in the NOFO for BEAD is the Buy American. Well, there's only so much that squeezes even further what you're able to do, because American manufacturers can only work so fast.
Boy, that would put a real damper on this like whole $65 billion thing, right? You
could slow it down. Not going to lie.
BEAD's $42.5 billion. It's like, how much does it actually cover, right? If we're actually forcing everybody to go through, that's crazy. Okay, so
well, you've got that, and then let's say you've got price inflation, right? So you're not told. So let's say that 42.5 that is really just for building those networks, that's not going to go as far if the price of the materials continues to rise. So what we could have said, gee, I've got this grant, I'm going to serve 5,000 households. Well, maybe by the end of the day, you're able to serve 3,800 households because of what inflation has done to you. So, yeah, it's things we all need to be really aware of as we go forward. I know it's to be a bummer.
Nah, there's no bummer to it. Like, we're all here to learn and to think about this stuff. But there's this sort of there's an exponential decay to the purchasing power of our nation's largest ever public investment in trying to get this right. And groups like Shirley's roll up their sleeves and get the jobs done, and any delay double costs, right? There's the direct cost, there's a first order cost of like, there's rural Americans that need this stuff right now, right? And then there's the second order cost, which is like, and tomorrow it's 2x more expensive, right? So that's why, we're at Broadband Money, like one of the things we do is like aggregate purchase power, right? Like aggregate up deals and go and work collective economics deals with vendors, right? To try to say like, yeah, on your own 100 miles, no. But of the 750 plus, Broadband Money applicants that are going through that system, you're part of a 100,000 mile order, right? So that's one hope, but I didn't realize it was that dramatic, and this idea that there's not even a price now, right? Like that's terrifying.
It is, because people are literally, because they're building fast and furiously now. And a lot of that has to do with ARPA, CARES, money coming down through the states. A lot of them are getting reconnect. But, when you take that money, you are making certain commitments. And so it kind of feels like some of the rules are being changed in the middle of the game. And again, at the end of the day, and that's the thing that I always keep in the back of my head, at the end of the day, it's the consumer that potentially suffers. And that's the issue. If we can't get this right, then you know what, at the end of the day, broadband providers will be okay. They're working as fast as they can. But it's those folks at the end of the line. It's those folks that have been prioritized to be connected, who are still waiting. That is what I think as a country, we just can't do this much longer. Nobody who's not connected is watching this today. So right. I'll share a story with you. I found this really powerful. So a new friend of mine, Angie Cooper, runs Heartland Forward Foundation. And she was
I've heard great things about that group.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. And Angie is awesome. So she was working with the FCC on the affordability program for broadband. And then she was working with them and she was like, all right, so you've got this plan. So how are you going to distribute it? Like, we want to help you. How are you going to distribute? And they were like, well, we're going to put it out online. And she was like, time out. If people don't have access because they can't afford access, but it's hard, right? We're hardwired to be like, well, of course, we'll just put it online. So,
oh man.
Yeah, sorry.
So that brings up another important topic, Shirley. And I think that, you know a lot about this from your perspectives that you've gained from your work. Like the cost of waiting, it's unacceptable, but you can't necessarily rely on DC hearing from people, especially if they're not connected, right? It's no longer the Mr. Smith goes to Washington era. It's like it's actually kind of hard to get there. Well, beltway traffic, all that crap, cost of flights, jet fuel is crazy, right? The more likely thing is that they're going to be connected remotely, but there's a whole group of people that they don't have the sort of foundational roads of the country, so to speak. They get them to their capital. So you've been working with the capital. You've been working out in rural communities with the folks in your membership that connect those folks. But it's basically like, how do you think about it when you've got RDOF, right? That program was like dedicated to rural stuff, right? And I haven't checked the latest, but it's still like, I think over halfway unawarded a couple of years into it. What are your thoughts on like this idea that let's take our time and install in DC, and like the people that we were supposed to help, like what's going on there? What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of RDOF. I think the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund really, it was a race to the bottom. When you do an auction, you're basically saying, who can do it for less? I can do it for less. And then suddenly what happens is exactly what we thought would happen is a lot of the folks who won the bids were like, ooh, I call uncle. I didn't really mean I could build it for that.
Yeah.
And so what happens is those people in those communities who thought they won those bids a year and a half ago, a lot of companies have pulled out. So those folks are all the way to the back of the line again. So I think that is really bad public policy. The thing I would say is, BEAD is going to take a while to roll out. So I think people need to temper expectations. But I think the thing that I love about what NTIA has done in their NOFO is they have a preference for fiber and future-proof technology. And I think that is a win for rural communities, because I think so many times we see folks willing to kind of be like, oh, I know, we'll just stick up a pole, or we'll do this, fixed wireless solution, or we'll do this piece over here. And I'm a fan of every tool in the toolkit. It's going to take everything to get the job done. But if we're really going to look at $42 billion, we absolutely have an obligation to people to build a future-proof network, do it right the first time. We're paving highways. Let's not, just fill in potholes. And I think the fiber technology is going to be important. But again, all of that is going to take time. There's mapping. There's going to be contested decisions. And that happens before implementation can start. So I don't really see money going out the door until probably 2024 for that program. Maybe the end of 2023 if we get it right and we don't have everybody in litigation with everybody else. But the okay thing is this gives states some time to ramp up in areas where they've never been asked to take on such huge capital obligations in the broadband arena. So in terms of state offices getting staffing and funding and expertise and the ability to do their mapping and jive with the FCC mapping. So and to have those critical community conversations, right? I think we're going to have to get people together. And I think the state broadband offices are going to be absolutely key players in terms of getting folks together, getting communities together, getting providers to the table. Let's all talk. Where's the need? Who's unserved? Who's underserved? Who's going to partner with who? Let's go. Partners. I'm a big partner person.
I'm a partner person too.
We should work together. We should partner on something. What do you say?
That makes a lot of sense. There is one thing to cover though, and it's got one of the coolest profile pictures in the broadband grants community, and it's you on a tractor. There's one thing to know, and I don't want this to be like any bad blood between us, but I'm from Maryville, Missouri. As you probably know, that's John Deere country. The tractor you're sitting on is not a John Deere. Can we put that behind us and look at what unites us instead of the difference of
but can
tractor
I also
choice?
say, who knew that you actually probably need an aerobatic and like a helicopter license to get into the cabs of one of those things, man?
Right.
That may have been, especially since I think I was wearing heels, probably taking on a lot because but it was pretty cool. But notice they didn't let me drive the tractor. They only let me sit in the tractor.
We don't know that in the picture. It is
You would
rendered.
never know. I
That's
should
true.
just
I thought you were actually out in the field, like I thought
yeah,
you're having
sorry.
a heyday, literally. But
Yeah.
okay. But heels, that's impressive. So we've got a ton of questions from the community. We had 10-ish at the start of the event. I think we got around double that now. They're continuing to come in. So, but I do have one last thing to ask you, like in general, because you just touched on it. It's partnerships, right? What are your thoughts on that? Like, your members are providers. They've already been providers. They're like the OG information providers in their areas, right? They brought like telephones and stuff like that to their areas. Um, in the days like proto-internet kind of days. But what do you mean by partnership? And what are your thoughts on like that phrase that you said in the beginning of like, providers teaming up with the communities? Because that seems like it's a really important thing. And we've been seeing some strange like thoughts. Like we love community networks, we love everything about like ownership models, we love open access, we love all that stuff. Is like there's some talk of like, let's just build and design it, build it and operate it and maintain it ourselves. Is like, it's not roads.
Yeah.
Right. These aren't the same as roads, right? These are high technology things that are going to need, the pace of innovation of the private sector and cooperatives and groups that have been in this business, right? So can you talk more about partnerships and how you see that being important?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So, again, I totally understand the desire for self-help, but to your point, when you broadband networks are complicated, they're complicated, and I will tell you that while everybody's super excited about the money coming in to actually build these networks, you don't walk away from these networks. It's one of the reasons why the Universal Service High Cost Program is so critical, is because that program for years has been not only allowing these networks to remain affordable because it offsets what would be the actual cost versus the number of people that cost is spread among, but it also allows the networks to be sustained and maintained. And that is really, really important because you don't just plop infrastructure in the ground and walk away and go like, job done. And that is where I think the partnerships can be so important, because when I look at communities that kind of are like, we're just going to do this. And I strongly encourage them to reach out to a provider near them, particularly a community-based provider, because these folks live and work and send their kids to school in these areas. They know what they're doing. They have been doing it for a number of years. They have the expertise. We talked earlier about the fact you can't find workforce anyway. So a community trying to find the workforce,
Yes.
competing against, the community-based providers have the workforce, they have the expertise. They know how to do feasibility studies. I think there is so much that can be done if people could check the egos a little bit at the door and say, you know what, I bring to the table, I bring the community, I bring the interest, I bring our digital inclusion plans, I bring our, concerns about, connecting everybody and doing some great things as a community, economic development. And you bring the provider to the table who says, all right, what can we do to do this together? I bring the expertise, I bring the staffing, can get the materials because I have been getting materials for years. So I have access to resources and distributors that communities don't. I think it's really pairing up everybody's strengths
Yeah.
and the effort to get the job done. But it's not easy. But the other thing that I will also say, people get really stuck in, there's one way to do it. Absolutely not. I see partnerships all across the country between my companies and municipalities, my companies and community groups, my companies and electric co-ops, my companies, even with water sewer folks. There are so many ways to structure this. The details is who owns it, who operates it, who management, who does the billing, who does the marketing. You can work those out. The key is to come together and say, all right, scope and scale. We can probably do this better together, because if it's an area that's unserved, it's already not served by one of my member companies, but they are anxious and building constantly to spread into those and underserved areas that are adjacent to their own service territories.
Scope, scale, and speed, Shirley. Like the African proverb, like if we want to go fast, we go alone, but we want to go far. I don't remember. It's an awesome proverb,
It is.
and it applies. You can move faster, through a partnership where people have those, as you described them, as superpowers, right? So this is a really important conversation. I'm glad that you're
Well,
hanging out with
and,
us. So.
and I'll just share, Chase, I was very excited because I work a lot with the electric co-ops and NRTC and some CFC who does a lot of funding for rural utilities. And just yesterday, I reached out to the leaders of those other three organizations and I said, let's do a webcast on partnerships. Let's actually profile for people to see, what's happening in Vermont, what's happening in West South Carolina, what's happening
That's cool.
with a fiber network in Indiana where electrics and telcos have come together to create a statewide fiber network. Those are cool stories. We need to amplify them and we need to share them so people can say, okay, it's the art of the possible. How do we do this?
Yeah, I dig it. Let's get into some questions, Shirley.
Okay.
Besides mine, right? First up is a question from Scott Woods. He's very thankful to get to work shoulder to shoulder with Scott here at Ready and Broadband Money, but he was before that at the NTIA. He asked, Shirley, can you discuss the impact of robust broadband, digital equity, and smart technology on rural economic development, specifically in farming, livestock, agribusiness sectors for future growth and expansion of those communities? I think we touched on this a little bit with smart rural communities, but not in those explicit terms, right? This is an economic development issue for any state directors couched in economic development groups listening. So yeah, Shirley, what do you think?
It is absolutely huge. And I will say I could like spew data, but like that isn't like my forte. But we've got things like our smart rural paper on fiber to the field. So I've got resources for folks.
Cool.
We've got some resources. Anybody can ping me afterwards. I am happy to share you the electronic version of these.
Trade offer.
Yeah.
One of those and a smart rural communities sign for a $3 trucker hat.
I think we can probably manage a trade there. I think we can probably do that. But
thanks.
But to Scott's point, the investment, the economic developer, they will talk about the multipliers. And, again, I'm not going to put on my economist hat here at this point, but there are multipliers are many in terms of, every dollar that gets invested and planted in the ground, what it does, whether it is, again, we can talk about the agriculture community, which is important, but let's also talk about the fact that when you're investing in telehealth and distance learning, you're able to recruit people to your town, you're able to retain people to your town who, people can't afford to live in a community that are losing their hospitals. And the folks who run the National Rural Hospital Association will tell you they are losing by the percentage on a monthly basis, the hospitals that are shutting down, particularly now that COVID support funding has dried up. So, you start looking at some of that just drives, you don't have the hospital, people aren't coming, people are leaving, you don't have that workforce. The other thing that we find that it really fuels, which is amazing, is the innovators, the business incubators, the folks who do Etsy. And we can laugh about that, but you know what? Etsy's big business, and your ability to do that in Northeast Missouri from your home base and sell across the world, those are huge economic implications, and they're all fueled by broadband. You live in a community where you don't have that access. You can't run your small business. So, it is.
There it is.
It's an essential.
So communities that don't figure this out and don't get their share of they don't team up with, their nearest existing provider out in rural lands, like they say, they turn their back to this. That's the future of a lot of the economy, right? That's already bigger than the physical in-person economy in the United States. And it's looking like it could be swing towards, order of magnitude more volume of economic activity transacted virtually than in person. You are nailing something here that's very important. Those communities, they might not have the opportunity to keep those special creators, right? They go on Etsy and places like Etsy and sell whatever they make that's special, right? That they have that the world wants.
Yeah. Okay, special creators, they're not going to keep their young people, right?
No.
You know what? Some of my member companies will tell me that their senior citizens get online because having robust broadband is the only way their grandkids will come to visit.
Yeah. Oh,
Because they
man.
want to stream, they want to Instagram, they want to connect with their friends while they're at grandma and grandpa's. That is a huge driver for senior citizens. So now think about, you don't have that connectivity. You're not keeping your high school graduates. You're not keeping your college graduates are going to come back. So you're losing, some of that vital brain power. So again, I know better folks have been able to quantify it, but I think we cannot underestimate. And if you're a broadband state director, and you are looking, better than anybody, the pockets in your state. And so the other thing I would offer up is I will be the queen of matchmaking. We tried a few years ago to do this broadbandmatch.com, and I'm not kidding. It was kind of like my version of online dating for communities and broadband providers to come together. I thought it was super clever. Clearly, I thought I was more clever than most.
You were just ahead of your time.
Thank you.
Let's team up on that. Let's get that into the community toolkit because that's a perfect win-win-win. And that's great that you were doing that years ahead of when that was, that's going to be a big thing in Bede. So cool deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another question, Shirley, far curveball. It's from Riley Haight, who's at Broadband Breakfast. She asked, will you tell us a little bit of history about NTCA, right? How did it get its start? How and when did it become Rural Broadband Association, right? Because I think it's important for folks that are listening that maybe aren't as familiar, right, with your group and the members, right? What they do.
So I love that question. Thank you for asking it, Riley. So we actually were born about 65 years ago. We actually grew out of the Rural Electric Cooperative movement. So we started off as the National Telephone Cooperative Association. We rolled out of the electric utility world about the time of that the RE Act added a telephone portion because farmers realized that not only do I need electricity, but telephone service would be really nice as well. So we evolved, and my folks, again, because of the fact that they're community based, they moved very quickly from telephone service to telecommunication service to broadband.
Yeah. Well, you remember back in the day, what did we do? We dialed up. That was a proto-internet network.
I remember those days. Doesn't feel that long ago. But the other thing these companies do is because nobody, and what they did is they provided service in the parts of the country where the large national providers chose not to go. Made perfect sense. You know what? If you're a large national provider, you're AT&T, you're devoting your resources into those parts of the market where you're going to have a return. You're not going to be looking into these low density areas. So by definition, my company sprang up 175 years ago to fill in those pockets of the country where nobody else was bringing the service. And that is why they're community based. That's why they live there and they work there. And then they evolved. And again, like I said, they evolved probably faster into being broadband providers because of the need of their communities. Their communities, the handicap of distance is so great that they knew that, they were the video providers. A lot of them were in wireless. A lot of them do data services. A lot of them do IT work because they are the folks that their community turns to as the experts in these areas. So they do become this one-stop shop. So they evolved into broadband very, very quickly. And we, about 8 years ago or so, there was another trade association called OPASCO that we actually unified with and said, you know what? One voice is more powerful than two voices saying kind of different stuff. So we were able to kind of put everybody, for the most part, under one umbrella to speak to this independent sector. And again, the folks who really kind of came in and provided telephone service when it was lacking, and are just doing the same for every evolving technology that comes along the way. So we're really proud of our folks. They serve literally, our average density is 5 to 7 customers per mile, which is kind of crazy. I'm here in Washington, D.C. area. I'm pretty sure my area has about 400 people per square, maybe more, when I look at those apartment buildings outside my office. But they're doing it and they're getting the job done.
I love that. Shirley, there's 5 to 7 human customers per mile, but in rural, there's often, more cows and other animals and entities that can benefit from strong infrastructure. So, I want to dive into a quick technical question.
Okay.
Community member Dave Todd, and he says, what can we do about latency? Right. So I think that y'all embraced wholeheartedly fiber, right? Like you said,
Get fiber.
ditch the copper. Like,
telling you, fiber is the way to go. And I know I can proselytize a little bit on this. And again, I caveat it with there are just parts of the country where we may just need to use different tools. But when I think about, the capacity, let's say satellite, we've seen some studies and done some studies that show that the capacity for satellite will be tapped out in 2028. And you want to talk about latency. It's great if you're the only one using that beam at that time. It's another thing when you've got 500 on it. And I think we have learned, and if there's a silver lining in terms of learning about technology during the pandemic, it is that we don't have time for latency anymore. We need to be synchronous. We need
that's funny.
to have
very good. Subtle.
Yeah. So I just, I think that I just think that we've learned a lot about how we use the technology and how quickly we are outpacing. If you're using 100 megs, that basically can power 3 devices doing HD and other streaming things. If you've got a gig, that's 20 devices at one time. How many households had like somebody doing homework at the kitchen counter, somebody streaming a movie from the basement, somebody doing a VPN at their desk? We learned capacity is really important. So yeah, it's all about fiber. You want to get rid of latency, it's all about fiber. Now we just deal with that supply chain. We've got this covered.
All right, I dig that. I got a Shirley says file going now. The first entry is we don't have time for latency. That's a good one. That brings up another question. Though. Talk about fiber. You teamed up with the Fiber Broadband Association. You all made a playbook, right? So, community member and leader Sarah Lysterlin asks, can you talk about the specific recommendations from that playbook? Can you give us a high-level overview of what is this playbook and what's going on there?
So we knew that, these state offices were going to have just a ton of stuff thrown at them. Suddenly it's like, bam, here you go. Here's this money. Now figure out what you're going to do with it. And yeah, they'll get a little bit of support to actually do plans and to staff up. But what we did is we worked with the Fiber Broadband Association to say, okay, if we were a state broadband office, we had to start from scratch. What are the best practices? We've been in the field forever.
All right.
So what are best practices? So it's things like for a state broadband office, what are the best practices for organizing and running a state broadband office that would be set to administer BEAD? We've worked with state broadband offices prior to a lot of states having them, Minnesota, border to border. Wisconsin had a very robust program. A lot of states had programs, taking the best of what are those and putting a place where people could access that. How to apply for BEAD funding, a little bit of how that application process with NTIA will look like. What does a grant program design actually look like? So trying to give state broadband offices some tips about how do you design a good grant program? What has worked well? What have we seen? Because we've seen a lot in this space. And then how do you administer those programs? So I will also say, Jace, that what we did is because the NOFO came out from NTIA, we've been working with Fiber Broadband Association to update this. And we think we should have something at the printer maybe in about a week or so.
Can we talk first?
Yeah. Okay.
Let's talk. That's good to know. Awesome. Shirley, this playbook is a super critical resource. There are a lot of states that are like, what the F, which is like, what the fiber? And your playbook is going to help them to answer that and other related F questions. Another question this one's from Tara Whipple, also Broadband Breakfast. Do you see a role for technologies besides fiber, right? At Fiber Connect, you spoke about how important fiber is. And does that mean in the role of technology that you see having an important role in rural America? Is there room for other technologies, right? Because on your website, there's a drone that's, ostensibly like somewhere it's talking to something wireless.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that?
Because you know what? Wireless needs wires. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. Yeah, that's another Shirleyism, but actually I didn't coin it. But
can't spell wireless without wire. Right?
But it's true. And, there have been many a time that I have shared with a member of Congress where I've held up my phone and said, So this does not go from my phone to your phone. Let me explain to you via a diagram, where the signal is going, how it is running to a tower, how it is then like the tower is carrying it through a fiber connection to another tower, taking that signal. So I think, so yes, I will say, first of all, I think there's wireless applications are huge. Wi-Fi is huge, but they're fiber fed products. 5G is a fiber fed product. So it is thinking about the integration of all those technologies. Now, I would say, if you live in a place, a remote island where satellite may be your only option for now, I get it. Being connected is better than not being connected. A long-term solution, I am not a fan. So all I know is that if I were having like somebody was doing heart surgery on me and they were doing like through a remote application, please do not do it on a satellite connection ever, please. I really want fiber right to the doctor. So, so again, and I think, our country is diverse. What it is like to serve a village in Alaska is really different than what it's like to serve a community in Pennsylvania. So thinking through those demographics is important. Okay.
I dig that. Let's take the gloves off for a second, Shirley. We got a question from Mike Falloon of Ready. Hi, Mike. And Mike asked, does NTCA have a strategy to ensure your members get the lion's share of the upcoming grant funding? Are y'all gonna, what's the plan? How are you gonna do it?
I think, in the areas where my companies think they can make a difference and where they go in to apply for the funding, I think there's ways that we can talk about the work that they've done. I think they can talk about the work that they've done. I think the proof is in the efforts that they've already made. But I do think, we do encourage them all to meet with their state broadband offices, because people kind of like to chase a shiny toy. They might hear of a big company and they may be like, ooh, that's a big cable company. That's cool. You know what? If you haven't interfaced with a community-based provider, I really encourage you to do it, because these
I love that.
Wake up every day thinking about the fact that if I provide crappy service, people are catching me at church, at the grocery store, and at my mailbox. So you know what? There is no other providers who are so focused.
Friggin' on.
Yeah, but it's a fact, right? Like, I live here, I'm mad about my service. Who am I going to call? These folks, and their communities where they live depend on that connectivity. So
you see that Saturday Night Live skit with trying to cancel charter?
Yes, I have.
Oh my God. Can you imagine pulling that kind of crap if you were a local provider? Like, you pick up the kids at school and that guy is like, hey, you can't do that.
No, literally, or that customer is your kid's teacher, or it is. And again, your community's living and dying by it. And you know what? They're, at the end of the day, whether they're a co-op or they're a family owned or they're a community owned company, they customer service is what they hang their hat on, and technology innovation.
Good deal, Shirley. So next question is from Drew Clark, who, if our math is correct, is probably somewhere in the middle of a Christina Lauren book, Something Wilder. I'm Googling the top summer romance novels of 2022 to see probably where he's spending his time. But before he got into that, he asked,
I was a little worried that you might actually know what is
I had to Google it, but how do you view the Universal Service Fund historically and today? Has it been important? Will it be important? How does this recurring revenue fund differ from the infusion of money from ISR?
Okay, so I'll give you the 2-minute version as opposed to the 5-hour version. So universal service is really important. It's been around for a long time. And what people don't understand is that is what has made broadband and telephone service affordable in rural America. Because what it basically does is says, all right, it would cost $200 to provide this service. Universal service is a support program that actually makes up that cost differential. So a consumer in rural America might only pay $65 or $70 for that service. It is an affordability program. It is the ability to maintain and sustain that network. It is absolutely vital. And the other services that are involved in it, like schools and library, rural healthcare, the low income program, all really, really important programs, because it is going to take all of that affordability and the network to actually get folks online. So right now the FCC is doing a proceeding on the future of universal service. critically important. This goes sideways. It's going to make broadband a lot more expensive and difficult to sustain in rural America. So we are working 24/7 to make sure that we have a seat at the table on this discussion.
Okay, good to know.
It's about all anybody really wanted to know about that. But if you want to know more, I'm happy to answer.
It was less than 2 minutes too.
Thank you.
But let's see, another question from Drew. And you touched on this a little bit, but I didn't know that NTCA, like your members were born out of RIA. Like I didn't know that linkage, right? That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But you asked, like, what did he ask? It's probably onto American Loyalty by Tracy Livesay at this point.
He's a fast reader.
Yeah, he's skimming. Will you tell us about the relationship, romance novels, that rural telephone co-ops have with rural electric co-ops? Are they friendly, competitive, supportive, agnostic? You said like you're teaming up with them. Like you called Mathis and you're like, hey, let's team up and actually figure out how to.
So I would say in the field, it's like everything, right? You and I might partner well together, but you might not partner well with Joe Blow. So I find that in the areas of the country where folks have been able to come together because they're both like kind of the big utilities in town, either they find a lot of ways to kind of collaborate, or sometimes they don't work together well at all. And I think that's a shame. So one of the things that is one of my missions, like starting with this webcast and some other things, is trying to figure out how we get together at the table, right? Because you don't work with people until you trust them, and you don't trust them until you know them. So how do you start having some of these conversations saying, look, I'm an electric co-op. I've got a really big footprint. You're my local telephone company or telephone co-op, and you're a smaller part of my footprint. Your part is fine. It's all fiber. But how do I get the rest of this area that you don't serve to be fiber connected? And I think having those conversations, having that trust, having that mutual interest, because it is your joint community, is really important. But sometimes, Jace, it's as basic as getting people to sit around the table and meet each other and trust each other and figure out something that is a greater good than themselves. So I'm a really big fan of trying to find those opportunities. So Jim and I talk regularly. He and I usually try to grab lunch every 2 or 3 months just to compare notes. How are things going? What is it looking like? How's your demographic? And always with the end of, all right, where can we partner together? Because I do think that scope and scale is good for the rural communities we jointly serve.
Okay, dig that. Lightning round time, Shirley. We only have a few minutes left. This next one's from Scott Wood. Said, I love your energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. How can we keep that excitement in the industry and among all stakeholders that you're talking about, right? Or if it's going to take several years to get this right, how do we do it?
Yeah, so it's keeping that momentum, right? Which can be kind of exhausting. So I think it's continuing to remind everybody what that goal is. I think at some point in this process, we're going to feel like we're plotting, right? We're going to be like, oh my God, the FCC mapping, this state is suing this state. And I think what we have to do, it's one of the reasons, again, while we continue to pull different players to the table, it's getting excited about what the guys in the Rural Health Association think. It's about what the folks at Bovine think about, smart ag. It's about working with the education people to say, all right, like what, where do we go with this? Will learning always be hybrid? So what excites me is continuing to think about the consumer, continuing to think about the end game, continuing to think about the digital inclusion piece, and know that if we build those networks, we're going to be able to get great stuff done. So I think we have to keep those stories out there. And I think we have to share the stories, because that's what keeps us all going, is the like, oh, that is so cool that, that the folks in Indiana are now having the state fiber network owned by all these different utilities that is going to be able to decrease the cost of carrying traffic for all the enterprise across the state using a fiber network. That's cool. And just, again, sharing, keeping that platform, making this a living, breathing conversation, I think is going to be really important.
Dig that. Next is from Sarah. Do you have any words of wisdom for local communities and providers that feel their state broadband office has got the broadband coverage statistics wrong? It is overestimated existing coverage. What can they do to change this?
Yeah. So you know what, that's going to be tough. And this is what I would just say, meet often, meet often, share statistics, share data, share maps. I think again that also, and I hate to say trust is another one of those themes, but you know what, carriers, this is, you know, their coverage is their intellectual property. Create that environment of trust where the carriers want to share that information, where they are motivated to share that information, to show you where their speeds are, to show you where their customers are. I think community leaders and providers cannot spend enough time together. I think whether third parties have to create that opportunity, where they create it themselves, where governors create it, where state broadband offices create it, I think they can be the hub of this wheel, right? There's so many hubs that, you know, I think about, but I do think state broadband offices have a real opportunity to be the convener. And that is where I think we're going to get the real stuff. People will put their stuff on the table when they're motivated to do it. And I think that the funding will actually help motivate that.
Shirley, we could do a day-long AMA and not even tap, you know, a portion of your, you know, impressive knowledge base and creativity, but we're out of time. It was awesome to hang out. Let's keep in touch. Folks that weren't able to follow along with some of the pieces, like this will be up on the internet if you have a connection. You know, this surely has been amazing. Thank you again so much. We know you're very busy for taking an hour out of your day and hanging out with the broadband grants community. We really appreciate that.
Important what you guys are doing, important to be part of the conversation. I appreciate it and enjoyed it greatly, Jay. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, we'll get this trade thing going. So we'll be in touch with the details of this. We want the big sign, the town size sign.
Big sign.
Okay. Yeah, okay.